Thank you so much, Sven. We're now going to listen to David Bell. So, David, you're a psychiatrist. You're the former governor of Tavistock and Portman Foundation Trust and the former president of the British Psychoanalytic Society. So we'll listen to you on how the doctors and subsequently politics realized that there was a need to change directions in the way trans-identified minors were being treated.
Thank you very much.
You have to, the button, the red one.
Which one, this one?
Yes, that's, yes.
Thank you very much, Sven.
And higher too.
Is that better? Okay. Well, I'm very pleased to be here. It's quite a difficult question to answer, and I agree with Sven. One shouldn't think that these are just to do with doctors by a long way. I think one of the things I would say at the beginning, and I'm sure this fits in with what was said yesterday, that this whole area is the most wonderful illustration of an uncomfortable fact about all forms of mental illness. That is, that all psychiatric illness occurs on the boundary between an individual and culture, and the manifestations of disturbance change depending on cultural change. In thinking about the major changes in the United Kingdom, we need to just, I suppose one fact is that over a period of about 10 or 11 years, the number of cases went up from 50 to nearly 4,000, no, 3,700. And one of the reasons for that was, of course, a huge cultural transformation causing an amplification of this manifestation of difficulty, but also because the Tavistock service became a national referral service. In thinking about major changes in the United Kingdom, it's first important to understand that we're made up of England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, that each have different histories and political structures. And that is consequential for how this has evolved. I'm mainly going to be talking about England, although England and Wales come under the same NHS. I think it's also important that there's one NHS. There's one national public, so that makes things, in a sense, different to some other countries. I think it might first be helpful just to say a few words about the context when change starts to take place around 2016, 2017. Although large parts of public organisations, such as the NHS, universities, companies, civil society, other organisations have been captured, this was, as we know, achieved through the success of trans organisations who were able to promote themselves, never through open discussion and debate, but only through influence and capture. And this worked remarkably well. They were very well advised. An important factor for this success arose from the inability of those who had doubts or were critical to be able to speak up because of the tyrannical group culture which quickly evolved as part of this capture. There was a private poll I heard in one of the major political parties not so long ago as regards self-ID, maybe a few years ago, and 50% of the MPs disagreed with rapid self-gender identification. But none would speak out publicly and say that, fearful of the consequences. And of course, the entanglement of adult trans issues such as self-ID with concerns about children was very successful in making it difficult for people to speak out for fear of being seen as illiberal, anti-diversity, anti-gay, and so on. It has been suggested to me that many in the Conservative Party, as by someone who would know this, saw joining up with the trans propaganda as a way of making their brand, as he put it, seem more modern and attractive. Edgy, as he put it. Similarly, substantial financial organisations such as Price Waterhouse gave large sums of money and promoted the rainbow for very similar reasons, to make themselves seem edgy and attractive, and the lottery funds similarly. My point is that although the presence of trans ideology within culture seemed to be strong, the whole capture was always on the surface, as it was never based on an evolution of thinking or understanding or debate. This lack of any real foundation or inner ballast, therefore perhaps made it more vulnerable than people thought it was. I saw this in micro, of course, at the Tavistock Clinic. That is, once some people started speaking, this always had a kind of, a first slowly, but then more rapidly accelerating effect, like a positive feedback loop. But then maybe by saying that, I'm revealing a rather touching naive faith in the durability of rationality and thoughtfulness that goes perhaps against a lot of evidence. It's very difficult to know really how to weigh things or weight things in terms of the impact, but certain things were certainly clearly very important, and each of them affected each other and were part of a moving process. But if I had to choose one thing of overriding importance, I would not have difficulty, and that is persistence and determination. As early as 2016, certain newspapers such as The Times, The Sunday Times, were already raising very serious concerns about this whole issue of treatment in children. They were largely conservative or even more right-wing newspapers than the liberal or left newspapers. And they wrote well about it. And then other newspapers, such as more tabloid papers, more on the right, also became involved and wrote very well. In 2018, when I was working at the Tavistock on the Council of Governors, I just have to say what that means. That's a parallel stakeholder organisation that has oversight over the strategy of the Trust, made up of various stakeholders, including a staff stakeholder. I was a staff representative. In my role as staff representative, and perhaps knowing a bit of my own concerns, a third of the GIDS staff came to talk to me. First it was one, then it was two, and so on. And all except, only one of them ever spoke to me in my office. All of them spoke to me in my private consulting room as they were frightened to be seen talking to me. I won't list the issues they raised as they are well known. Over that summer, 2018, I wrote a report bringing the seriousness of this to the attention of the governors and of the management of the Trust, the board. The Trust tried to bury it, but I, with the help of some colleagues, persisted and managed to bring it to council against the management's directive. At that time, I had stood down as I'd come to the end of my term of office, but other colleagues continued. Following a review by the medical director, which management claimed exonerated the service, my report was leaked to the Sunday Times, and that was a very major event. It appeared on the front page of the Sunday Times, and this was the beginning of the axis shifting. I must say, during this whole process, I found newspapers to be extraordinary in their diligence and also their care with people. You know, I never had any worries myself about speaking to newspapers in terms of them misquoting me. At this time, some parents or adolescents spoke to another major national newspaper, the Observer. The Tavistock Trust tried to publicly question my competence and also subjected me to threat. And this led to the resignation from the Council of Governors of Marcus Evans, which again led, as we said at the time, if you're going to resign, no point in doing it quietly, which led to more newspaper coverage. The item now was not going to go away and was picked up by all major newspapers, except The Guardian, my own newspaper, the paper I read, which until this day has censored and silenced reporting on this issue out of fear of their own staff. Though I recently published a lengthy comment piece after I've been seriously misrepresented at my insistence. Thus was post-Cass. Thus the whole matter was now getting more and more into public awareness. Hannah Barnes, a reporter for a major TV channel, Newsnight, became very involved and has written a marvellous book called Time to Think. It gives a whole history of this issue and provided a number of exposés over the following years. At the same time, there was formation of there had been the formation of new grassroots-funded organisations such as Transgender Trend, Women for Scotland, Fair Play for Women, Women's Place, Sex Matters. They brought together expertise to challenge policies and institutions. A revived women's movement galvanised the voices of many people, and giving those working within the healthcare system courage and support. In 2020, Kira Bell, an ex-patient and parent, took the NHS to judicial review. Judicial review is a type of legal case where judges review the lawfulness of a decision or action made by public authority. This focused on the issue of consent and had wide publicity. The positive judgment, delivered in December 2020, found that children were not in a position to give consent. I've only got 1.5 more pages. Found that the children were not in a position to give consent. But the judges in the same judgment, and this is really important, if you read the judgment, and it's not long, it's easy to read, expressed very serious concerns about the quality of care on GIDS, the poor governance, the lack of data, no data on comorbidity, the lack of any follow-up, the lack of any knowledge as to what happened to children, what percentage of children seen in the clinic went on to opposite sex hormones, or to surgery, or to adult services. The judges, in their very English way, expressed their absolute horror at hearing this with the words, "We are somewhat surprised to hear." That means shock in English. Although the judgment as regards consent was overturned at appeal, and I can explain that later if you want me to, this doesn't affect the other, it was a technicality. This doesn't really affect the other findings. The damage had been done. It was a shock to the NHS and to government. The very next day, GIDS puberty blocker study was published. They tried not to publish it, and the judges insisted they publish it. And of course it showed no positive effects and some negative effects. And within a day or two, the NHS had imposed an emergency revisiting of service specification. This focused on A further factor in this gathering momentum were the various legal cases which succeeded, been a whole number of very important legal cases regarding freedom of expression to those with gender-critical views, so undermining undermining the culture of fear. Harry Miller, a policeman, tweeted a rather tawdry limerick on women being women, and was charged with having committed a criminal offence. He appealed against this at a very public event, and he won his appeal. Maya Forstater was dismissed from her job in Global Development Europe, having expressed gender-critical views. In 2020, her case has been upheld, and the appeal has been upheld, and she was awarded damages. This means that gender-critical views were now legally protected beliefs, a very major transformation of culture. Then there was other cases, such as Kathleen Stock, who's here, who resigned her academic post in 2021 as a result of intimidation for her views. The Cass report, which I've left to the end, was of course fundamental, but it could only have occurred in the context of these other very major factors. Cass delivered her interim report in February 2022 and a final report this year. The axis was turning, but this resulted in a huge increase in the momentum of that turn, and has of course had huge national and international importance. In 2021, NHS England and NICE gave guidelines that accepted there was no data to support the prescription of puberty blockers. And now, of course, it's for puberty blockers. It's not quite clear, but largely they're not to be prescribed at all. There's talk of a trial, but many of us will do all we can to show that such a trial would be unethical for children. In October 2020, the Care Quality Commission, that's an external body that goes into hospitals and services to examine them, to see how the patients are doing, how the staff are. They revisited the tavistock. And some of us put a lot of effort into getting previous staff who had left to talk to them, which they wouldn't normally have done, and to make sure they had all the information. The report was published in January 2021. This was a damning vindication of all the concerns that I and the other whistleblowers had raised, and acknowledged that staff were intimidated. It was clearly a big shock to the trust, and subsequently, after some more pressure, external managers were sent into the trust to oversee. Sonia Appleby, the child safeguarding lead, won her employment tribunal, which accepted she'd been intimidated and her capacity to do her job seriously undermined. Organisation of colleagues in workplaces such as Royal Colleges of Child Medicine, Surgery, physicians had little success, and similarly psychiatrists, but now has paid off with a new president and the CAS review.
Thank you, David. Thank you
I
so
just
much.
need to I finished actually, but I just need to say there are many things that haven't changed, and I really need to say that it's very important.
Just like
this
10
rosy
seconds.
picture. Yeah. So I'd like to emphasise the whistleblowers, the persistence, the sympathetic media, political will, but also it's still going on in schools. This government don't seem able to prevent this gender ideology in schools. Adult services are seeing 17-year-old children, and they're even more captured than JIDS ever was. The Labour Party seems to be very, very confused about this, as including a conversion bill in its manifesto. Private providers are now using the opportunity to make a lot of money by providing puberty blockers to children. And there's also big ideological kickback. Thank you.